Jeff, we're on. We're doing it.
We're on. And we don't have to tell people this is take two, but Jordana just took her mic out with her legs trying to cross them. What a way to start.
Trying to be a lady. See how that happens? Yeah,
God.
Forget it.
Before we even get rolling, what the hell does SLT mean?
So you would think I made this term up, but it stands for Senior Leadership Team. And the first time I heard it was when I worked for a tech company. It was actually Shutterstock, and they said, "Hey, are you coming to the SLT meeting?" My friend Lisa Pellegrino, and I'm like, "What's the SLT meeting?" And immediately my mind went down into missing a letter between S and L and U and T, and I'm like, "Wait a minute." Yeah, I was like, "This is an appropriate meeting for me." So no, we were going to the Senior Leadership Team, and normally what it was is your VP of Sales, your VP of Finance, so every organization, whether you call it your leadership meeting, your senior leadership meeting, it's your boardroom table where people are sitting around making good decisions and not so good decisions. And so this series that you and I have come to know and love is about the decision that you make when you're sitting at that table and you wish you could have a redo.
God, I don't know. I've got thousands of redos. I got more stories that could fill a room. Some would be really embarrassing. Some you actually participated in.
Don't blame me.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this topic though. Love it.
You know what? And it's not about failing. It's not about failing and making mistakes and the things that we do as a leadership team or as a leader that are wrong. Really, it's about the impact that it has on you, your mental health, your career, your team, the organization. And it's about sometimes the misinformation that happens around that table. Because you and I both know, Jeff, that you make those decisions and then you progress in your career and you beat yourself up about them all the time. But I found there's a handful that you look back on that you're like, oh man, I wish differently.
Yeah. There's more than a handful. And yes, although I think you learn so much from them, right? And that's part of just being human. You grow through a lot of these experiences. And probably the biggest challenge for me is that I put way too much pressure on myself in thinking about all the things that I frigged up, right? And I think even from an emotional standpoint in your life, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but I've gone through a couple bouts of depression, and I think it was caused partially because of how difficult I was on myself, because I would go into these corporate meetings and I'd fuck them up.
Yeah.
You know, great topic to cover.
You know what? And we figured since we're co-hosting this together and having guests on, we might as well interview each other as the first and second episode to get to know why this is important to us and why we think this is important to other people. So with that, why don't you tell us a little bit about Jeff pre-career? Because I've known you since we both worked at Auto Trader more than 10 years ago. And the Jeff that I thought that I knew in your VP capacity when I was a manager there is very different than the Jeff that I know today.
100%. And yeah, so I am definitely going to open myself up here. I'm going to give a lot of detail, which people don't know. I was a tough kid to handle when I was young. I was an athlete, loved to play hockey, lacrosse, those types of sports. So I think if anything, that helped me develop as an individual. I'm just a team player and want the best for everyone around me. Having said that, though, I grew up in a very dysfunctional home, and my parents broke up very early in my life, probably around the age of 12. I was on my own at age 13. I actually got kicked out of the house. That's how much of a problem child I was. And I remember because I get kicked out of the house. My mom locks the door. I got my hockey equipment, just came from practice. So I go to my dad's place and he says, yeah, you can stay here for one night. So this is my life. Anyway, yeah. But couldn't have been better. So I went and found a rooming house, stayed in school, although I hated school. I got to tell you, just didn't want to be there. And if I had a redo, God, Jordan, I would go back to school. I would just go back and educate myself like crazy.
Let me ask you a question. You said you went to a rooming house. A lot of times when kids are kicked out and they're preteen, teenagers, they'll go to a friend's. Was that an option?
It wasn't an option for me. And I think I was ashamed at the time as well. I'm a fairly confident individual. And so I just wanted to figure it out on my own. And this is part of the challenge, right? Is that sometimes we regress into ourselves, right? And we just want to go and figure it out and not let people know that we have a problem going on. I had to go find a job that could support myself to pay for my rooming house. It was $12 a day. And I had no furniture. I had nothing. It eventually worked out. And I met this really cool guy. Diefenbaker is his name. And he was in Kitchener and he ran a Midas muffler shop. And I went in to get a job one day and my rooming house was just down the street. And he said, Jeff, I'll tell you what, you got a job. I want you here at 6 a.m. every day. I will drive you to school for 9 o'clock and I'll pick you back up after school and bring you back for the evening shift here. And as long as you'll do that, then I'm happy to help out. And that kind of became the springboard for me. Eventually, I got to the point where I got a little lost in my life. And at that time, my father said, you're either going to need to go to school or we're going to put you in the armed forces. I know it sounds funny, like your dad's going to force you to go in the armed forces. He did. Literally, he and I got into a little bit of a dust up and he said, Jeff, you're going to school. And I basically said, Dad, frig you. Like, fuck, I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
And he said, fine, then we're going to go and you're going to sign up for the armed forces and get a career that way. Literally 2 days later, I'm on a train going down east for basic training in the military.
What?
So yeah, spent a year and a half and was moved out of the armed forces. It wasn't for me anyways.
Yeah.
And then I came back and my career blossomed from there, but I was always innovating and finding different ways to live. And I think if anything, if people were to ask me, Jeff, are you a well-educated guy? I would say no. I learned everything I did from being on the streets, from adapting to situations and problems I had in my life and figuring out how to be with people. And more than anything, I think that's helped me in my sales career. So that was pre-career for Jeff.
I see. And you never know these stories when you're sitting down and you're talking to people at a boardroom or in the lunchroom or just casually in passing. So here's Jeff going into the military. At that point in time, do you start to plan out your career? When you looked at, this is what I want to do with my career, these are the places that I want to work. Was that a plan?
No, I guess, first of all, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did have an entrepreneurial spirit in me. I went into the military. I was scared shitless. I got to tell you, like it was just a whole different world for me. But when I came out and I came back home, I really wanted to be in something where I could work with people. And my father had always been a senior executive in sales. And so at the time he was a senior executive at Purolator. And so I thought, oh, maybe I'll give
I did not know that. I did not know that at all.
And so I thought maybe I'll give my hand in sales. Actually, I'm not sure what his exact title was, but he was in sales leadership at the time. I'm dating my Jordan. At any rate, but I got to tell you this story because I always say to reps, you can't trick a trick. And it's because I have done everything that every other sales rep out there tries to do to evade the system, to get more commission, to screw someone, to do whatever. I have done it. And one of the true stories is that before I went to Purolator, I worked for this company out of Scarborough called, and what they did is epoxy flooring. And I had a job for 6 months and never went to work. Never did anything. I actually collected a check for free. So that just tells you how lost I was at the time.
Oh, God.
And eventually they caught up with me because the sales manager at one point in time was like, where's this Nisley guy? We haven't seen him. And I got fired.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
right?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
But you know what? What really came out of that was I remember calling my father and saying, "Hey, Dad, I got fired." And he says, "Yeah, because you should have been fired. So, you've got to find something that you're really going to apply yourself to." And I said to him, I said, "Well, I'd love to come and work with you." And this was at Pure Letter Career. He says, "Jeff, can't be done. You can't come work for me. I'm in a senior position here," so on and so forth. And I didn't want to listen to him because I knew some of the people that were in management at Pure Letter. They would come over to our house and I'd be there and I'd meet them. There was this one guy, his name was Gary. He was a sales manager at the Rexdale facility. And I remember going in one day, had no unannounced, no appointment, anything. Went to the security gate and said, "Yeah, it's Jeff Nyes. I'm here to see Gary." And Gary comes out and, "Did we have an appointment?" I'm like, "No, dude, I'm here for a job." He's like, "What?" He says, "Okay, come to my office." I think at that time I had a cigarette in hand and a Tim Hortons coffee in the other.
Can you imagine going to an interview like that now? Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh my God. But I went in and he said, "Listen, Jeff, like your father's here. You really don't have a sales background. You have nothing." And I said to him, I said, "Listen, Gary, I really believe that I can do this job. I know all of you guys. Give me 3 months. In fact, you don't have to pay me. Just give me 3 months. And if I don't cut it, then fire me." He's like, "I'll go and ask, but I don't think this is going to happen." Lo and behold, it did happen. And that's where my career started, was at Pure Letter as a sales rep. In the first year, I became one of the top reps in the country. Second year, I was the top rep in the country. And then the third year, I was the top rep in their national accounts group. So yeah, so just crazy, right? And literally, I didn't know shit from Shiola. I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
Going into it, but I think all the things that I had learned personally about people and adapting and things like that, and I had very good people around me and very good leaders, and I just blossomed from there. Yeah.
So where would you say, whether it's a place of work or a moment in time, but where did you develop your leadership style? Because you've been a leader now for years. So where did that come from?
I think it was a combination of a couple things. First of all, to answer your question, I don't know. It happened, right? Over a period of time, it happened. First and foremost, I think it came from the fact that I was involved in sports. I was part of a team. I am somewhat of a guy, as Jordana.
Yeah.
I'm a very focused, determined individual, and I'm passionate about what I do. And so when I get into anything, I get in.
Yeah.
And I roll with it. I think that was one of the pieces that kind of helped me from a leadership perspective. I think the second part is that I had no thoughts of being a leader. It was just one day someone said, "Hey, Jeff, would you like to manage this national account group at Pure Letter?" And I'm like, "Okay, sure." And it just rolled from there. Over a period of time, though, I had some really good mentors, right? Yeah. Some people who gave me a chance, believed in me. And I think that's the biggest part of it, is that as people grow in their careers, to have a mentor, whether you ask them to be a mentor or it just happens that way, is so critical. And the biggest mentor I ever had in my career leading up to that was Doug Clark. Remember Doug Clark?
Yep, I do. Yep, yellow.
Yep. Yeah. And Doug brought me in, and I remember I was hired as the VP of sales at Trader, coming out of logistics and probably well over my skis. I've sold myself beyond what my capability is. And I remember about 3 months into having the role, he pulled me in and says, "Listen, Jeff, I believe in you, man, but you're fucking this up. Okay. And so you need to figure out how you're going to manage this team. I am here to support you. I will do whatever I can, but we got to get this together." And somehow that just became the switch for me in that part of my career, that kind of vaulted me. And Doug became my mentor for the next 14 years.
Yeah.
And not to mention, I got to work with great people like you and Mark and Jerry and all these other people. We were all young, but we all had the same passion and purpose.
That honesty though, like when you get that honesty from a leader, especially someone that you respect, that you don't want to let down, that sticks with you forever. And my impression of you working at Trader was that you had it all figured out. I knew that Jeff was the VP who was going to support his sales team because he had grown up from the ranks in sales. And that's always something that I respect of a sales leader or a COO, is if you've come from being that rep and you grow up into the role, you have a different understanding of the sales division than if you're teleported into that role.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think there though, Jordana, and even at that, when I was having the discussion with Doug, I got to tell you, emotionally, I wanted to cry. Like I literally, right? Like my inside was like, oh my God, am I a wannabe? Do I really have this? Can I do it? But that whole taking ownership piece kicked in for me. And it was like, I left the meeting. I said, Doug, I will not let you down.
Yeah.
And that was the end of the conversation. He still remembers that from, he'll mention that to me. I talk to him all the time, and we reminisce about different things that happened over our career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So redo, there's a redo moment. There's something, there's much like that conversation with Doug sticks with you. There's got to be a decision that sticks with you. Big question for you, Jeff, is what was leading up to the redo moment and what was the decision?
I think the redo moment for me was when I left transportation and I got into advertising, like moving from logistics when I was at UPS over into Auto Trader. Was I felt that I was in my own little zone and I knew what I knew and I could finesse my way, but I knew I didn't have all the skills. Like I just knew it. And so I wouldn't, it's semi to a imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where I'm posing, and I was able to do that because I was a better poser than the people around me. And I recognized that. And I also recognized that, hey, I don't want to go back to school and get my MBA and all the rest of this kind of stuff so I can not be an imposter. What if I change or shift and really challenge myself to go to another industry and actually lead in that industry? And so that's what it was. I applied for the role, and it was actually a role at Yellow Pages, which I was turned down for. But Doug said, hey, I'm hiring at Auto Trader. I'll take him. So I actually became second in. In fact, the guy that you might remember, Mark O'Brien, he became the third in. We both got hired on the same day.
Yep. So, oh God, I didn't know that. Yeah.
We did. Yeah. Yeah. Doug used to say we got the house and the picket fence. So yeah, so I think for me, the redo is that I just I needed to prove to myself, but also educate myself, but it wasn't going to be by the typical way. I'll go get my MBA and educate myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've always learned on the job. Always.
Is there, if looking back at Auto Trader, at that company, at what we went through, an acquisition, 2 acquisitions, a restructuring, there was a lot that happened there. Anything that you wish you could redo in your tenure there?
Yeah, I think that for sure. Because I'm a passionate individual, I know that I was tough on my team from time to time, very tough. And some of it was definitely premeditated, as in I wanted to wake people up to the reality of the business. Because as you know, we were struggling. We were in really bad shape. And 2008, 2007, 2008, when the market crashed, remember, like we lost a significant amount of our revenue.
Yeah.
And so if there was a part that I would go back and redo, it would be my leadership style. More to today, where I'm a better listener. I spend more time caring about what I say versus it just coming out of my mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And because there's no doubt that, hey, you and I've talked about this. People would be like, has anybody seen Nisley today?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's in a bad mood. Okay, let's stay out of his way.
Yeah. Yeah. Or my director would come to a meeting, and having just come to a boardroom meeting, and the saying shit rolls downhill, and it does. It absolutely does. And you don't start to recognize that until you progress in your career and you start to see what happens at those boardroom tables and the conversations that take place. But there's an impact. Jeff Nicely's leadership style at that company had an impact, not just on you and your family, but an impact on the culture of that organization because you were high up. Looking back, what do you think that impact was?
I think I helped the organization to have a purpose. I think I helped us as a sales organization really understand what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And there were lots of opportunities for, think about it, that entire team to basically bolt and say, hey, I'm not part of this. But in fact, what we did is we became stronger, united. And what did we do? We went out and basically crashed the market with a whole new plan, program. We went from paper to digital, right? We went out with what, Dealer Smart Solutions, I think it was called at the time. So if there was one thing I think that I left there, one was process rigor, but the other part was let's work with a purpose. And when we do that, we are so much trustworthy, or so much more trustworthy to our customers and credible about what we want because we care.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there people who don't like Jeff's leadership style, whether
Yes.
at that company or post that company? Why?
Because I'm direct, I'm courageous. I pull people over when I see things that aren't appropriate. I'm straight up and in your face. Have I toned that down a bit? For sure. But I expect the same thing from people coming back to me.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of people who I know even today will say, hey, I'm not going to work for that guy. But that's okay, because I think if anything, my goal and my heart was always to make people better, was not to do anything to their character, to their, what I would call their soul.
Yeah.
Not here to impact your soul. I'm really here to help. And the one thing I always hated in my career was when people didn't tell me the truth, when they weren't honest with me. And so I felt that was something that I had a responsibility to do. So yeah, there's people out there, nah, I don't want to work with that guy.
Yeah. Yep. Post those days, you've done, I know because we talk all the time, I know you've done a ton of different things. You pivoted, you made a courageous decision to pivot from transportation, supply chain, logistics into advertising, media, and then that just spawned off in another direction. So people who haven't caught up with you in a while, what successes have you seen in the last few years?
Yeah, I went from enterprise, right? Large sales organizations. Now I'm working with SaaS companies, bootstrap, startup. I've worked for some companies where I was the only salesperson, right? AutoZen being one of them. I went to Rise People, which was payroll, time and attendance, those types of things. And I managed a small team of 10. And by the way, I didn't know what I was doing in SaaS. I came from enterprise. So here I am selling, and we're selling via Zoom call. And we have all this technology that I never had with any enterprise company because we couldn't afford it, believe it or not. And so I really had to learn how to manage in that environment, change processes and procedures, and really figure out how to manage those types of people. And so I've spent a lot of my time now working and advising around how to create process, how to manage people, compensation, you name it, all around the SaaS environment. And it's freaking cool. It's awesome. So now I'm coaching and advising in that area. And for me, it's always about learning, Jordana. That's why I came to you. Hey, I need help. I want to learn more.
So you just mentioned coaching and advising. So there's what I think is, I always liken it back to recruiting, where I think that we've got such a responsibility to be honest with people and transparent with people, because there's the old saying in sales at organizations we work for, oh, this isn't impacting anybody's life, right? No one's dying because of not selling cars or anything like that. You know what? This is impacting people's lives. I consider recruitment to be impacting people's lives. I consider having a seat at the table where you can make decisions to be able to impact someone's life. So what guidance do you have, Jeff, for those other VPs and heads of that are sitting around a table who are having conversations that they're uncomfortable with?
Yeah, I had a lot of those. I think, first of all, being honest, being respectful, spend more time listening than talking. It's one of the mistakes I made. I was very confident and always believed that I knew what all the right answers were, and I didn't. And there were times where I got caught and people were very direct with me. So that's the first thing. Also know that anybody that we're managing, any group, everyone wants to work for a purpose. And then once we get to that fact of getting their arms around the business you're in, you will get so much more out of them. If people come to work and they just basically, they check in at 9 and they leave at 5, it really tells you that you haven't given them an environment where they should care about the business. And so it goes both ways, right? If I'm an executive, I need to be able to show the people I'm working with that I'm their teammate. I'm not this executive, right? That I can be at their level, they can be at my level. And together we have something that we're trying to achieve. And when it does get achieved, it's that whole that success and acknowledgement. Yeah. If there's anything that I really focused on in my career, was being respectful to successes and making sure people knew how proud I was of them. And I don't want to sound like their dad, right? But how proud I was for them to make big steps. Yeah. And so I think for leaders, that is a core part of it. People want to be loved, right?
Yes, Jeff, it's so interesting because, again, having been somebody who worked for you in an organization and then somebody who now, is friends with you, there's just so much that I think we don't understand about people. And I think a lot of people that are listening to this are going to see a different side of Jeff, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. And you also just blend that line between how you grew up and that young man that you were and that old man that you became now, Jeff.
Yeah, no hair. I used to have golden locks.
There's no work-life balance. It blends in. Who you became at work is a direct effect of who you were growing up. And thank you. Thanks for spending some time. Thanks for being guest number 1. I'll be guest number 2. And then I hope to bring on a ton more people that we can talk to.
Loving it. Let's do it.
Woohoo!
Sure, Dana.
Thanks, Jeff.
Cheers.